Our presentation will be going over exposure versus effect and how this can alter certain reflexive mind bugs and biases. We dive into a reflexive mindset. So what is that? A reflexive mindset is the part of our brain that is automatic. It forms quick, hasty, and often unreliable decisions and opinions. These can be formed based off previous experiences, which is why part of our brain doesn't take the necessary time to think before assuming. Now, branching off these assumptions, they turn into biases. Because of the lack of time and thought, this leads to common bias thinking. Some examples are assuming Black or Latino people live in poor neighborhoods. We read this in automating inequality with issues such as redlining. There's also the problem with third-party punishment. Now, according to the Journal of Experimental Psychology, this is where people tend to punish out-group members more harshly than in-group members. Blindspot also introduced the race implicit association test, or the race IAT tests, and how people have hidden biases within them that they may not even acknowledge. However, in the end, quick assumptions can lead to societal injustice and diversion.
The next slides will be discussing outgroups and the Robert Caves experiment. A simple definition for an outgroup is a social group with which an individual does not identify. The Robert Cave experiment was where 22 white 11-year-old boys were sent to a summer remote camp, and they were then observed for this experiment. The big takeaways from this experiment was that it confirmed group conflicts that can be caused by competition over resources, and that outgroups can be faced with hostile actions formed from in-groups due to this competition over resources. The next slide will be talking about automating inequality, blind spot, and the Robbers Cave experiment. Automating inequality brings to light a lot about how we react with certain groups, how we see certain groups, especially the poor. And the blind spot also brings into account situations like Carla's hand story, where in-group actions can affect outgroups. And then the Robbers Cave experiment brought to light really good understanding about how outgroups are formed and what we can do to help limit the divide between outgroups and in-groups.
In the next slide, we will be discussing implicate association tests in the development of exposure. As explained in Blind Spot, an implicate association test is designed to uncover our unconscious bias or automatic preferences held by individuals. It is able to measure our strength of associations between a concept and an evaluation, which is the development of a stereotype. Reflexive biases are developed through past experiences and teachings and can intrude the way we think or perceive the people around us. By taking the implicate association test, we are able to expose ourselves to those reflexive biases that we can hold and be able to be cognitively aware of them and do our best to dismantle those biases. In dismantling those reflexive biases, people tend to have different results than they initially predicted after taking the implicate association test, and this often causes confusion and frustration within oneself. Once we acknowledge our reflexive biases and know what we hold, we can know whether we are letting these mind bugs protrude our thoughts and actions. The best step you can take in dismantling a reflexive bias is to take the IAT and be cognitively aware of our actions and everything surrounding our biases.
Mind bugs. What is a mind bug? Well, our book Blind Spot defines mind bug as an integrated habit thought to lead to error in how we perceive, remember, reason, and make decisions. Mind bugs, also known as memory bugs, when you recall something that didn't happen but associated it with a memory that did happen. Also referred as a false memory. For example, we used a list in our book, that demonstrated a powerful but ordinary mind bug that created a false memory of us seeing a word in the list before compared to the new list. How effective is a mind bug? Visually, thinking that there is something there when in fact it's not, or perceiving that something is there and it's not. For example, we used a picture from our book based on the shading of a picture that looked like there's two different colors, in fact, but they were the same. Importance of a mind bug. When referring to an investigation, going off of someone's eyewitness statement can be perceived as intolerable and not reliable because it allows the guilty to walk free more than actually getting the bad guy themselves. Blind Spot talks about social mind bugs' effectiveness and how they give us false feelings of faith in people that we shouldn't trust, and also the opposite, that we just trust the people that perhaps we should trust. How we can avoid these mind bugs. Bahing and Greenwald explain that the best way to defeat or avoid mind bugs is pretty much to walk around them, and by doing this sets up situations where profiling becomes unnecessary.
Mind bugs are habits of thought that affect how we consciously and subconsciously perceive and judge others. The evolution of these has slowly changed the way that society accepts others for who they truly are. The author of Blind Spot conducted a study with Harvard University from 2007 to 2016 examining the implicit and explicit biases that society holds. They have found that biases towards sexual orientation have decreased the most. The most striking find is that sexuality attitudes have changed towards less bias, by as much as 33% on implicit measures. They also found that attitudes concerning race have decreased. Implicit race attitudes have moved in the same direction, but at a slower rate than explicit attitudes, changing by 17%. How exposure affects mind bugs. One of the main causes of inaccurate perceptions is due to negative and stereotypes that are perpetuated through news stories and social media. They can be used to reinforce sexist, religious, and racial stereotypes that society may either implicitly or explicitly hold. In terms of racial perception, especially when African Americans are depicted as criminals, they found that heavy viewers show more negative automatic affective reactions towards African Americans. The findings indicate that stereotypical news content can influence implicit attitudes, or automatically activated gut reactions. Overall, it can be concluded that negative exposure that reinforces stereotypes only further promotes the implicit biases that society holds towards certain groups.